We've seen these terrible stories, of course, about the civilians that have been killed in Gaza. Now, the family of a British aid worker killed by an airstrike in Gaza have criticised the sale of arms to Israel. This is a very hot political issue. Rishi Sunak, under growing pressure after the strike, it killed Britain's John Chapman, James Kirby, as well as Australian, Palestinian, American, Canadian and Polish nationals. Now, we also, on the back of this, have had quite significant numbers of letters, 600 or so legal experts, 3 former Supreme Court judges also saying we need to suspend arms to Israel. Now, to be clear, the United Kingdom actually, our arms sales to Israel make up 0.4% of our arms in this country. Now, the question, and it is a difficult one, in that essentially what we're now seeing is calls for the UK to stop selling arms to Israel. The flip side and the argument to continue is because Israel was attacked.
Yeah, you cannot tolerate the, I think, negligent killings of your own citizens by a foreign nation without some semblance of accountability. My problem on this, however, is the problem I have, generally speaking, is that I think there's an awful lot to criticise about the way that Israel has handled the kind of the counter-attack, as it were, to that awful set of aggressive acts on October the 7th. But there is always a double standard when it comes to Israel that isn't applied to other countries.
Thank you.
So when I'm not sure whether Baroness Hale has been an avid campaigner to stop arms sales to Saudi Arabia since she left the Supreme Court. I don't know if she has, but I really hope she has. Well, because this is kind of the problem. We sell arms to Azerbaijan. We sell arms to Saudi.
Our biggest supply. We supply our biggest amount, 2.7 billion, to Qatar.
Yeah. We do.
And then Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia have been responsible for, interestingly, the coalition-led death of 306,000 people in the Middle East.
So can I just ask you, if I may, Sam, just in terms of that, when you've got a former Supreme Court judge, Lady Hale, there, and also you've got people like Lord Sumption's response was quite significant, I thought. He said the framework of international law around war does not mean countries can act however they want, even if they have been provoked or attacked. However, outrageously, you cannot go around indiscriminately slaughtering innocent civilians and children. You cannot attack aid convoys. And the rhetoric, and we talked about this on the show yesterday, the rhetoric from countries, including the United States, is definitely hardening. I mean, I think Biden's response to Netanyahu, I mean, he said he was pretty outraged at what was going on. How much of this is actually Netanyahu and his fight to retain his political office?
I think a huge amount of this problem is Netanyahu and Likud and its far-right coalition more broadly. The problem we have, and that is that it's a problem with many international relations situations, but particularly this one now, is you have a leadership that is invested and has an interest in continuing this war and continuing the killing. Why would he have that interest? Because so long as there is a fight, so long as there is danger, his political pitch to Israelis works. If this was resolved, there would be no need for Likud, because Likud's entire political pitch has been about preventing a two-state solution. And in fact, the Netanyahu government was facilitating the funding of Hamas up until very close to the 7th of October in order to split the Palestinian people so that they couldn't unite around a two-state solution. So you're saying there was no due diligence on where that money went? No, I'm not saying there was no due diligence. I'm saying there is statements on the record from Netanyahu that it is a deliberate policy to fund Hamas, to keep a split between Hamas and the PLO so they can't unite around a two-state solution.
I will come back to Dr. Renee, because I know she'll have something to say on this, but just in terms of the president, he said to Netanyahu, these strikes are on humanitarian workers, and remember, they were humanitarian workers. Not only that, Israel knew where that convoy was. They had agreed route. They knew exactly where that was going. Also, those vehicles were 1.5 miles apart, 3 separate missile strikes. He went on to say that this is unacceptable, and the president said they need to implement specific, concrete and measurable steps to address civilian harm, humanitarian suffering and the safety aid of workers. Rishi Sunak also said to Netanyahu, if you do not introduce humanitarian aid, we will declare Israel in violation of international humanitarian law. We've also seen all of these responses from the international community. I don't know how you stand on this. How do we move forward? What happens? Does Sam have a point that actually this is actually Netanyahu has a lot of blame?
Yeah, he's I think has always been an unhelpful actor in this, in the various attempts to revive the peace process in the Middle East. And to be fair, there is an awful lot of anger, it seems, as very much an outside observer in Israel, about why Israel was unprepared for this attack, despite various warning signs, and how Israel has responded. He and his coalition partners are not performing well in the polls, so it looks, as I understand it at the moment, quite likely that if there were a general election tomorrow, Netanyahu would be out, and I think that can only be a good thing. But when it comes to ensuring humanitarian aid and humanitarian convoys can get to where they need to be, this is absolutely essential. I mean, I mentioned Azerbaijan before, we sell arms to an awful petro-state, serial human rights abuser that was responsible for the ethnic cleansing of 100,000 Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh several months ago. Even they were kind of opened themselves in the end to protecting the Lachin corridor between Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh to allow refugees to move and aid to move in and out. So, given that even Azerbaijan can kind of suck it up for a little while, I think the Israelis need to step up.
I think that's a very balanced and a very interesting way of putting it. However, we must also remember that even if Netanyahu is going to go tomorrow, that doesn't take away the threat from Hamas, which will rearm itself and slaughter Israelis again.
Yes.
But second to that, lots of this aid, as it enters the country, is having Hamas militia jump on it, kill the lorry drivers and steal it.
Yeah.
So there's a lot going on here.
Does that mean we shouldn't be sending aid in?
No, of course not. Of course it isn't. But we should be trying to get it to the people who actually desperately need it. But my issue with David this morning, we've had a very heated discussion about this already, is nobody cares about the civilians being killed in Sudan, 33,000 of them, 306,000 in Yemen, 16,500 in Russia. But you're not calling for us not to arm Ukraine.
Yes, I've definitely been calling for sanctions on Russia. I've called for sanctions on Sudan.
Do you want us to stop arming Ukraine?
No, I won't, because Ukraine is defending itself from an assault. Well, no, it's entirely different. You cannot compare these two things.
I would agree.
First of all, before October the 7th, Israel had already killed more Palestinian civilians than at any year since 2005. That doesn't justify October the 7th, but neither does October the 7th justify the way Israel is acting.
So I'm sitting between the two of you here because actually what happened to Israel was absolutely unacceptable, right?
It was. What has that happened to the Palestinian people?
Well, I was about to say. So now we're in a position where you've got 1.5 million people in Gaza. Many of these are innocent people, and they're being told to move south, move north. Then Israel seems to strike. These people are desperate. We've heard there's a humanitarian disaster taking place. We've also got information to the Foreign Office, to Alicia Kearns, saying that UK may be in breach of international humanitarian law. So this is very complex, but at the same time, the pressure is ramping up. You've got Boris Johnson saying we absolutely need to continue to supply Israel with arms. Do you think the public mood is changing?
I don't know, and to be honest, I don't actually think that this is high on the radar of many people outside of the Westminster bubble and various kind of left-wing student groups, to be perfectly honest with you. But it is nonetheless an important issue, and it's really something I can't give a clear talking point or an answer on, because it's horrendously complicated. Both sides have suffered immensely. Both sides have legitimate moral claims that they make, and my heart really goes out to the millions of people on both sides of this.
I would agree.
Who want absolutely nothing to do with the aggressions and the politics of their rulers, who are suffering as a result.
I have to go to break, but so finally, do we stop arms exports, or do we believe the Prime Minister when he spoke to Harry Cole the other night, where he said there is a formal process where we're going through, we are looking at the evidence, and then we will make a decision on that? Is that the right thing to do?
Yes, I think so. I mean, the Israelis have been given an opportunity to respond, and I hope they do.
We cannot stop arming Israel.
The Israelis have had 6 months to stop an indiscriminate attack, carpet bombing one of the most densely populated places in the world. The fact that we are still arming them is a moral stain on our character.
But what else are they supposed to do? I genuinely asked that question because...
Sorry, I missed that. Say that again.
What else are they supposed to do? Because I genuinely... I can't... I can't really get to grips with the morality of what Israel is doing in Gaza. You look at the scenes and they are awful, but what else is Israel supposed to do? If it has the absolute right to eradicate the people...
I have to go to a break.
to eradicate the people who lost
absolute right at all. It does not have that absolute right.
Of Hamas, yes, it does. And how are you supposed to get rid of Hamas without doing what they're doing now? Explain it.
Exactly. I'm going to pause here. We advanced nations have fought wars in these situations for decades.
Sam Harrison, Dr. Renee, thank you very much indeed.